What you're about to see is one of the most intense political confrontations ever recorded in Judge Caprio's courtroom. When the mayor's wife walked in believing her husband's office placed her above accountability, she made a critical error. She attempted to pressure and intimidate a sitting judge. What followed didn't just dismantle her sense of entitlement. It ultimately damaged her husband's political standing and ignited one of the most unforgettable corruption scandals in Providence history. Story reveals what happens when political privilege collides with judicial authority, when someone confuses their spouse's elected position with personal power, and when a mayor's wife learns that trying to strong-arm a judge is the quickest way to undo everything her husband has built in public office. But before we break down this political collapse, less than 1% of viewers are currently subscribed. So take a moment to hit that subscribe button, because this case, centered on political misconduct and the consequences of challenging judicial independence, deserves to be heard by everyone who needs a reminder that no political title places anyone above the law. It's a routine Wednesday morning in March, and Providence Municipal Court is working through its usual list of traffic cases and local violations. Outside, the early spring air hints at a fresh start. But inside the courtroom, things are moments away from shifting into a charged political showdown. At exactly 10:30 a.m., the courtroom doors open decisively, and in steps Vicky Romano, the 45-year-old wife of Providence Mayor Anthony Romano. She carries herself with a commanding confidence, a demeanor shaped by years of assuming her husband's office shields her from the expectations that apply to everyone else. She's wearing an expensive designer suit that likely costs more than many people earn in a month. Her jewelry reflects the courtroom lights with clear intention. Her overall presence conveys the kind of confidence that forms when someone has never been refused by anyone influential. Vicky is appearing today because 3 weeks ago, she received a citation for parking in a fire lane outside an upscale waterfront bistro during a political fundraiser. The violation happened while she attended a $1,000 per plate dinner supporting her husband's re-election campaign. The penalty is the standard $90 to $200 fine plus court fees. But Vicky isn't here to pay anything. She's here because she believes her role as the mayor's wife should excuse her from what she views as minor city regulations that, in her mind, shouldn't apply to political families. What Vicky doesn't realize is that she is about to confront a judge who has remained free from political influence for 35 years and has no patience for politicians or their relatives who assume elected office. Gives them special treatment under the law. As Vicky walks toward the defendant's stand, her body language immediately sets a challenging tone. She shows no humility, repeatedly glances at her costly watch as if the hearing is unworthy of her time, and stands as though she believes her presence is a courtesy to the court rather than an obligation. Victoria Romano. The court clerk calls out, reading from the docket. Vicky steps forward with clear impatience. Her political ties evident in her attitude and in her assumption that everyone present already knows who she is and why she considers herself important. Judge Caprio lifts his eyes from his paperwork, showing the practiced awareness of someone who has encountered every kind of political entitlement, including spouses of officials who mistakenly assume their connection to power grants them legal exceptions. Mrs. Romano, Judge Caprio begins, his voice carrying the calm authority shaped by 35 years of judicial service free from political influence. You are charged with parking in a designated fire lane, violating City Ordinance 15-28. This incident took place on March 2nd at 7:45 p.m. outside the Waterfront Bistro. How do you plead? Vicky's reply immediately suggests this case is about to turn into a political confrontation, unlike anything the courtroom has handled before, Your Honor. Vicky says, her tone layered with political confidence and thinly masked frustration. I plead not guilty because this citation reflects a basic misunderstanding of the practical realities of city operations and the functional demands of political leadership. Judge Caprio puts down his pen, never an encouraging sign for defendants who assume they can lecture him about how municipal systems work. Mrs. Romano, were you attending an official city function or performing any municipal duties at the time of the violation? Your Honor, she responds, I was at a political fundraiser for my husband's re-election campaign. As the mayor's spouse, attending such events is a key part of supporting effective leadership and staying engaged with the community. The courtroom falls silent. Vicky has just suggested that campaign-related activity places her outside the scope of fire safety rules. Mrs. Romano, do you hold any elected position or any formal role within the city of Providence? Vicky's discomfort becomes noticeable as she realizes she is being asked to clarify the limits of her actual authority. Your Honor, as the mayor's wife, I serve in an informal yet important role supporting city functions and representing the administration at community events. Judge Caprio's expression remains steady, but experienced observers can tell he is preparing to explain the clear difference between political influence and legal authority. Mrs. Romano, can you point to the specific municipal code or state statute that exempts a mayor's spouse from fire safety rules? Vicky falters. She hadn't expected a municipal court judge to press for legal particulars. Your Honor, she replies, trying to shift the focus. I believe you're overlooking how municipal leadership actually operates in practice. The pause that follows is loud in the quiet courtroom. Vicky has implied that Judge Caprio lacks an understanding of municipal government. But she keeps going and makes a far more consequential error. Your Honor, she continues, her tone becoming that of someone explaining an obvious point to someone who doesn't see it. I've been involved in Providence politics for 15 years as the mayor's wife. I understand how municipal authority and civic leadership function better than someone who sits in a courtroom all day handling minor infractions. Ripple of stunned murmurs sweeps the room. With those words, Vicky has suggested that political rank and social standing trump judicial expertise. What follows next escalates the moment. Looking straight at Judge Caprio, with clear political confidence, she adds, Your Honor, you need to weigh the practical consequences here. My husband is the mayor of this city. He appoints members to numerous municipal boards and commissions. The city's budget affects court funding. I advise you to consider carefully how you handle this case. Those sentences amount to a political warning, directed at a sitting judge. Vicky has crossed a line. Her remarks imply political pressure and retaliation, not merely a defense. The statement risks not only her husband's reputation but the emergence of a major political scandal in Providence. What Judge Caprio does next will directly challenge Vicky's political overconfidence and may even jeopardize Mayor Romano's future in office. Judge Caprio rises from his bench, something he rarely does, signaling that a significant moment is unfolding. He removes his glasses with steady, intentional movement and looks at Vicky with a calm but firm expression, prepared to deliver a clear lesson on how government actually functions. Mrs. Romano, Judge Caprio begins, his tone controlled but carrying the authority of an independent judiciary. Did you just threaten this court with political consequences? Vicky, misreading the judge's silence as uncertainty, presses forward with her attempt at political pressure. Your Honor, I'm only explaining the realities of municipal government. Political leaders have duties and connections that go beyond individual cases. Judge Caprio nods slowly. as though he is carefully noting every word. I see. Mrs. Romano, since you've attempted to pressure this court and question my understanding of municipal authority, let me explain how our government is actually structured. The judge reaches for the constitutional law books on his desk. Mrs. Romano, you mentioned that your husband appoints members to municipal boards. Are you familiar with the constitutional principles of separation of powers and judicial independence? Vicky pauses, aware she may have stepped into a constitutional discussion she is unprepared for. Your Honor, I understand that effective leadership requires cooperation between different branches of government. That's not what I asked. Mrs. Romano, are you aware of the constitutional requirement that the judicial branch stay independent from political influence or pressure? Vicky's confident stance begins to weaken as she realizes she's being steadily outmatched by someone who understands constitutional law far better than she understands political leverage. Your Honor, I never meant to threaten anyone. Mrs. Romano. Judge Caprio cuts in, his tone now carrying firm constitutional weight. Threatening a judge with political consequences is not only improper, it may also be illegal. This is known as judicial intimidation, and it is a felony under Rhode Island law. The confidence drains from Vicky's expression as she understands she may have committed a serious offense. And she did it while being recorded in open court. Furthermore, Mrs. Romano, you implied that I lack an understanding of municipal governance. Allow me to outline my background for you. I've practiced municipal law for 45 years. I've served on this bench for 35 years. I've worked with 12 different mayors, including your husband. I understand municipal authority better than public officials who assume their spouse's election automatically makes them knowledgeable about government. But Judge Caprio isn't finished. What he says next will completely undermine Vicky's argument and reveal the extent of her political misconduct. Judge Caprio lifts a thick file from his desk. Mrs. Romano, since you attempted to pressure this court and claimed political authority, I decided to review your parking and traffic violation history. Vicky's face turns pale. She clearly did not expect her driving record to be examined. According to city records, you've received 11 parking violations in the last 2 years. How many of those fines did you pay, Mrs. Romano? The courtroom falls silent as Vicky absorbs the magnitude of her legal and political mistake. Your Honor, I'm not sure of the exact number. I'll give you the exact number. Mrs. Romano, you paid none. According to these documents, you failed to address 11 municipal citations, resulting in $2,200 in unpaid fines and penalties. Vicky attempts to respond, but Judge Caprio continues with precise detail. In addition, Mrs. Romano, city parking enforcement has recorded 17 separate instances where you used your political position to avoid receiving citations. This includes 2 occasions where you told parking officers, and I quote, "Do you know who my husband is? This ticket will disappear." Vicky's political confidence has completely faded, replaced by real fear as she realizes her repeated misconduct is being revealed in open court. Your Honor, those situations were misunderstandings. Mrs. Romano, threatening parking officers with political retaliation is not a misunderstanding. It is a misuse of political authority. And now you have attempted to use the same approach toward a sitting judge. Judge Caprio's tone becomes firmer and more commanding. You implied that your husband's role as mayor grants you special treatment. You attempted to pressure this court with political consequences. You have shown a continued pattern of using political influence to avoid responsibility under the law. What Judge Caprio states next will surprise everyone and mark one of the most significant political controversies in Providence's recent history. Mrs. Romano, I am not only finding you guilty of the fire lane violation and imposing the full $200 fine plus court costs, but I am also holding you in contempt of court for attempting to undermine judicial independence." Vicky's expression freezes in disbelief. But Judge Caprio continues. "Furthermore, Mrs. Romano, I am instructing court administration to send a full transcript of today's hearing to the Rhode Island Attorney General's office for review regarding potential judicial intimidation, political misconduct, and abuse of public trust." The courtroom reacts with surprise as Vicky realizes what this means for her husband's political future. But more importantly, Judge Caprio continues, standing firmly in his role. "I am referring this case to the Providence City Council Ethics Committee and recommending a full review of Mayor Romano's administration regarding the repeated misuse of political influence by family members." Vicky appears ready to collapse as the full impact on her political standing becomes clear. "Your Honor, you can't ruin my husband's career over a parking ticket." "Mrs. Romano, I'm not ruining your husband's career. You damaged it the moment you chose to pressure a sitting judge while showing a clear pattern of political misconduct that reflects directly on his administration." Judge Caprio steps closer to the defendant's stand, his judicial authority unmistakable. "Mrs. Romano, let me explain something about political authority and judicial independence. I've served under 12 mayors in my 35 years on this bench. I've watched political families rise and fall. I've seen officials who believed they were beyond accountability learn that in this courtroom, the Constitution carries far more weight than campaign donations." His tone shifts into that of a civics instructor addressing a student failing in ethics. "Your husband serves because voters allow it, not because this court does. But when political families use influence, pressure, and wrongdoing to escape responsibility, they weaken the democratic system that put them in office to begin with." Vicky stands motionless, her earlier confidence completely gone. "You entered my courtroom today believing you could intimidate a judge by invoking your husband's political position. Instead, you've shown precisely why political corruption endangers democracy and why an independent judiciary is vital to any constitutional system." Judge Caprio returns to his bench, ready to issue his final ruling. A mayor's wife who attempts to intimidate judges comes from the same political circle that pressures ordinary citizens. A politician whose spouse assumes laws don't apply to them is often someone who believes democracy exists for personal benefit rather than the public interest. The judge lifts his gavel. "Mrs. Romano, the fine for your fire lane violation is $200. Your contempt of court citation adds another $500 and requires 40 hours of community service. But more importantly, you will need to explain to the Attorney General, the Ethics Board, and the voters why a sitting judge determined your behavior to be improper and harmful to democratic governance." Vicky speaks so quietly it's almost inaudible. "Your Honor, please." "I'm not finished, Mrs. Romano. You noted that your husband's office influences court funding and municipal appointments. Let me explain what actually protects judicial independence: the Constitution, the rule of law, and the principle that no political title provides immunity from accountability." Judge Caprio scans the full courtroom, including political reporters who had arrived expecting an ordinary traffic hearing. Let this serve as a reminder to every political family watching. Public office is a privilege granted by citizens, not permission to pressure judges, disregard laws, or compromise the system that entrusted you with authority. When political families decide they are above the law, democracy is put at risk. He turns back to Vicky, whose head hangs in complete public embarrassment. "Mrs. Romano, I strongly advise you and your husband to reflect on the difference between serving the public and serving yourselves, between genuine leadership and political misconduct, and between representing the people and taking advantage of them." Judge Caprio raises his gavel. Court is adjourned. The gavel comes down with finality, but the situation does not end there. What unfolded in the hours that followed would clearly show why challenging judicial authority often results in political fallout. As the courtroom cleared, Vicky remained at the defendant's table, looking down at the citation that had cost her $700 and jeopardized her husband's political future. The political protection she had relied on for 15 years had been steadily dismantled by a 76-year-old judge who understood that democracy functions only when everyone, including political families, follows the law. Political reporter Sarah Chun, who had observed the entire hearing, spoke with other journalists as they prepared their reports. "I've covered Providence politics for 2 decades, she told Channel 12 News. "I've never seen anything close to this." A sitting judge openly outlined a pattern of political misconduct involving the mayor's family. As Vicky exited the courthouse, political reporters who had watched the proceedings followed with their cameras. Her phone vibrated nonstop with messages from advisors, campaign staff, and party officials who had viewed the live stream. The footage of her public political setback reached more than 5 million views within the first 48 hours. Political blogs examined Judge Caprio's detailed presentation of Vicky's misconduct as a clear example of judicial independence countering political overreach. Law schools began using the courtroom exchange as a case study on the value of separation of powers and constitutional accountability, but the most immediate impact occurred at Providence City Hall. Within hours, the Rhode Island Attorney General's office announced a formal investigation into the Romano administration. The Providence City Council convened an emergency ethics hearing. At the same time, the editorial boards of 3 major local newspapers called for Mayor Romano's resignation. By that evening, Mayor Anthony Romano held a press conference. Standing alongside his wife, he announced that he would not run for re-election and pledged full cooperation with all investigations into his administration. "My wife's behavior in court today does not reflect the values of public service or the chanfis or the puplas, or the not reflect the values of public service or the values of public service or the chanla. Respect for law expected of political leaders," he stated. In a single morning, the Romano political dynasty, built over 15 years, collapsed after the mayor's wife attempted to intimidate a judge. 6 months later, the Attorney General's investigation found that the Romano administration had fostered a culture of political privilege and legal exemption, extending well beyond minor infractions like parking tickets. Mayor Romano completed his term, but his political career was effectively over. His party refused to endorse him for any future office. Attempts to rebuild his political career demonstrated the long-lasting consequences of corruption. No political organization would support him due to the documented pattern of legal intimidation and abuse of office within his family. Years later, political science students would study the Romano case as an example of how quickly political careers can collapse when families mistake public office for personal immunity. Professor Janet Walsh of Brown University tells her students, "Judge Caprio did not end Mayor Romano's career to make a political statement. He acted to protect democracy from families who believe they are above the law." The video of that Wednesday morning became one of the most widely viewed moments in political accountability, shared millions of times across social media. Political science programs around the world used it as material to demonstrate the importance of judicial independence and the risks of political corruption. For those who knew Judge Caprio personally, the incident was simply another example of his defining qualities: defending constitutional principles under pressure, educating through justice, and transforming political arrogance into accountability. He showed that judicial independence is not just a legal principle. It is the cornerstone that prevents democracy from being dominated by political families rather than serving the servings of the public. In an era when political corruption often goes unchecked, Judge Frank Caprio demonstrated that constitutional government functions when judges resist intimidation, courts remain free from political influence, and everyone, including mayors, families, understands that threatening the judiciary is the fastest way to destroy a political legacy.